The leather journal landed on the dining table between them like a court verdict. Callum Hargrove didn't raise his voice. Men who had built empires from nothing rarely needed to. They had learned something far more devastating than volume. They had learned silence. The particular kind of silence that drops the temperature in a room and makes the air feel thin. He stood on one side of that table. Serene stood on the other. And between them, that journal, cream-covered, her name written on the inside flap in handwriting that looked exactly like hers. She had never seen it before in her life. "I trusted you," Callum said, just those 3 words, measured, final, the way a judge speaks before sentencing. Serene's hands were still at her sides. Her face was composed, but inside, every alarm she possessed was sounding at once, because she understood in that moment what was happening to her. She was being framed. And the worst part, the truly terrifying part, was that whoever had done this had done it so carefully, so precisely, that even she couldn't immediately explain it. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. What do you say when the evidence stacked against you looks airtight, and yet you know, in the deepest and most honest chamber of your soul, that it is a lie? What do you say when the person across from you has already decided? The 2 little girls who needed her were asleep upstairs. And somewhere in this house, the woman who had done this was waiting. Callum Hargrove had not become a billionaire by trusting easily. He had started Hargrove Digital in a 1-bedroom apartment, a space barely large enough to fit a desk, a server rack, and the kind of ambitious desperation that makes young men do extraordinary things. He slept 4 hours a night for 2 years straight. He made every mistake a young founder makes and learned from all of them without losing the fundamental drive that kept him moving. By 36, Hargrove Digital was valued at just over $2 billion. But what the financial press didn't write about was what he came home to every night. 2 girls, 8 years old, identical twins, so similar in appearance that new teachers needed a seating chart for 3 weeks before their personalities made the distinction automatic. Ava and Isla Hargrove, his daughters, the people he had built everything for. Their mother, Renee, had died 3 years ago, a sudden cardiac event at 33 years old. She had kissed him goodbye at 7 in the morning and collapsed in a parking lot before 11. There was no warning, no chance to say the things people think they'll always have time to say. Just a morning, a goodbye, and then the permanent absence that followed. He had not recovered from it. He functioned, he was built for function, but the soft interior of him had gone very quiet. He showed up for every school event and bedtime routine. He held his daughters when they cried for their mother, but he could feel, with clinical accuracy, that he was providing structure where he needed to be providing warmth. He began interviewing nannies. He interviewed 19 candidates over 6 weeks. Most were extremely qualified. They arrived polished and said all the right things. But Callum had a genuine skill. He could sit across from a person and know quickly whether what they were presenting was who they actually were. The 20th candidate was Serene Caldwell. She arrived in a cream blouse and dark trousers, natural hair pulled back simply, carrying references organized with small color-coded tabs. She sat down across from him without the performance of the previous 19 and said, "Before you ask me anything, I'd like to ask you one question. What do your daughters need right now that they're not getting?" Callum went very still. In 6 weeks of interviews, no one had asked him that. "Safety," he said, more honestly than he had been with anyone in months. "Their mother is gone. They need to feel safe without her." Serene nodded, not with professional sympathy, with something genuine. "Then that's what I'll give them," she said. He hired her before the week was out. What followed was not what Callum had prepared himself for. He had expected competence. He told himself competence was enough. Serene shattered his modest expectations within the first month. She studied Ava and Isla the way a dedicated scientist studies something she finds genuinely fascinating, with patience and the willingness to revise her understanding as new information emerged. She noticed that Ava's appetite dropped when she was anxious about school, so dinner became a slower conversational ritual where the day was unpacked before food was touched. She noticed that Isla processed emotions in her body before she processed them in words, that something would bother her for days before she could name it. And so, Serene gave her space and proximity simultaneously, being physically near without requiring speech. Within 6 weeks, Ava had started laughing the way she used to before her mother died. That full-body laugh, head thrown back, completely unguarded. Callum heard it from downstairs one evening and stood at the bottom of the stairs and just listened, as though it might vanish if he moved. Within 2 months, Isla had started drawing again. One afternoon he came home to find a drawing taped to the refrigerator, 3 figures eating what appeared to be tacos. Underneath, in Isla's careful print, "Our Tuesday." He stood in front of that drawing for a very long time. Trust for Callum was not an emotion. It was a conclusion reached through accumulated evidence. He had assessed Serene constantly, looking for inconsistency, for the gap between what she presented and who she was. He found no gap. Her care for his daughters was genuine and unglamorous and consistent regardless of whether anyone was watching. He trusted her completely. Petra Novick had worked for Callum for 6 years before Serene arrived. She was, by any objective measure, outstanding at her job. She managed his professional life with a precision that had saved him from several disasters. She was discreet, reliable, and almost supernaturally organized. She was also, in the interior of her own life, in love with him. She had never articulated it, not to him, barely to herself. It lived in her the way a low, continuous note lives beneath a piece of music, structurally present but rarely acknowledged. When Renee died, Petra had quietly believed the geometry of things would eventually shift in her direction. She understood his world. She understood him. Then Serene walked through a door on a Thursday morning, and 3 months later his daughters were laughing properly for the first time since their mother died. Something inside Petra fractured very cleanly. She didn't act immediately. She watched for 8 months. She watched the easy way Serene moved through the penthouse, not like an employee, but like someone who belonged. She watched the girls reach for Serene reflexively when they were tired or sad. She watched Callum's face when he came home to a house that was running smoothly, the way his shoulders dropped, the way the tightness around his eyes eased. She watched, and she built something. Serene kept a journal. A small blue hardback book with cream-colored pages, kept on her nightstand. Petra had seen it once during a message delivery, and had photographed 3 pages without deciding to, the reflex of someone who collects information instinctively, who never knows what might become useful. She studied those photographs for weeks. The handwriting, slightly left-leaning, a particular rhythm to the spacing. Petra had always had an aptitude for detail, for replication, for precision. She practiced for 3 weeks, every evening at home, filling notebook pages with repeated attempts at Serene's handwriting until her hand could produce it without conscious effort. Then she drove 2 towns over to a specialty stationery shop, deliberate, somewhere she wouldn't be recognized, and found a journal with the same cover style, the same binding, the same cream pages. Close enough that only someone looking for the difference would find it. She brought it home, she wrote. What she wrote was the specific genius of the operation. She didn't manufacture obvious villainy. She wrote entries about the growing attachment the girls had to Serene and how that attachment created leverage. She wrote about the comfort of becoming indispensable to a grieving man and how that indispensability could be converted, when the time was right, into terms. Cold, strategic, entirely believable. She filled 2/3 of the journal, then she stopped, enough to be convincing, too much would feel fabricated. She went into the penthouse on an afternoon when Serene had a brief errand and the housekeeper was in the basement. She placed the forged journal on Serene's nightstand, in exactly the position where the real one sat. She took the real one and tucked it into her bag. Then she walked out. And just like that, the trap was set. The stage was perfectly arranged. All Petra had to do now was wait. But I need to pause right here for just a moment. If you are new to this channel, welcome. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, welcome to Nanny Grace channel. I am so glad you found us today. This is a place where we tell real, raw, deeply human stories about trust, betrayal, loyalty, and the quiet, unbreakable strength of people who never stop doing what is right, even when everything is falling apart around them. Stories like Serene's. If you have ever been doubted, dismissed, or falsely judged, if you have ever stood in a room, told the truth, and watched someone choose not to believe you, then you are exactly who this channel was built for. You belong here. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss a single story. We pour our whole hearts into every one of them. Now, take a breath. Because what happens when Serene walks through that front door is something that will break your heart before it heals it. Let's continue. 2 days later, in a meeting with Callum about travel arrangements, Petra let something drop. Lightly, casually, the way you mention something you're slightly uncertain about mentioning. I'm sure it's nothing, but I thought you should know. I went to Serene's room to drop off household documents, and she was writing very intently in what looked like some kind of personal ledger. It was probably perfectly innocent. I just know how much you value transparency. She gathered her papers. She left the room. He read the forged journal that evening. He read it twice, slowly, looking for something that would resolve the contradiction. Every entry built on the last. But the handwriting was Serene's, not similar, hers. He had seen it on school permission slips and grocery lists and the small notes she sometimes left him. The handwriting in this journal matched that exactly. That was the thing that broke something in him, not the words. The handwriting. She came home to a house that felt wrong before she opened the door. There is a particular atmospheric quality to a home where something has shifted, a stillness different from ordinary quiet. Serene felt it the moment she stepped into the foyer, a bunch of wildflowers in her hand that Ava had picked from the park. She saw Callum's face. The flowers stayed in her hand. The journal sat on the dining table between the candles and the fruit bowl. She looked at it. The cold moved through her slowly, from the top of her skull downward. Before her mind had fully caught up, her body already knew. She opened it, read 3 entries. And she understood what had been done to her with awful, precise clarity. Callum, she looked up, I did not write this. The handwriting. I know exactly what the handwriting looks like. I'm telling you I did not write this. My journal is blue. This cover, she pressed her fingertip to the binding, the texture is different. It's close, but it's not the same. He looked. He genuinely tried to see it, but he was examining the cover through the lens of what was inside, and what was inside had already done its work. He was looking for confirmation rather than truth. I think it would be best for everyone, he said carefully, if you took some time away while I work through this. Every articulate, honest part of Serene wanted to lay out a case. To demand, he examined the cover more carefully, to consider who had access to her room, who had both the capability and the motive. She had the whole architecture of it assembled in her mind within seconds. But she understood something about Callum's pride. He was a man who had been careful, who had assessed her, who had dropped his guard, and who now felt that his precision had failed him. When a precise man feels foolish, he doesn't always reach for truth first. He reaches for the nearest exit from his own embarrassment. Arguing would not help her tonight. All right, she said quietly, I'll pack a bag. She walked up the stairs with her shoulders back and her eyes forward. She stayed at her sister Camille's apartment across the city. She went through the household systematically in her mind, who had regular access to her room, who had seen her handwriting enough to replicate it, who had the patience and intelligence to do something like this without rushing because this wasn't rushed. Whoever made that journal had taken their time. They had thought about every detail. She kept arriving at Petra. Facts: Petra had come to her room on at least 2 occasions. Petra had access to the house when Serene was out. Petra had seen her handwriting on household documents. Petra had, and this was something Serene had filed away without knowing why, a particular way of watching Callum when he didn't know he was being watched. Not admiration. Ownership. The precise gaze of someone mentally inhabiting a role they had decided was theirs. She could not prove any of it. Not yet. But then she remembered something. The twins had been home early from school on the afternoon 3 weeks ago when Petra had come by. She had been surprised and pleased by their early arrival. She had not seen Petra herself that day, had assumed she had already gone. But the girls had been in the house. Had they seen something? The penthouse without Serene was quieter in the wrong way. Ava and Isla came home to a living room that looked the same and felt entirely different. Callum had explained things with adult words, careful framing words like complicated and temporary. Ava had looked at him with her mother's eyes and not asked any follow-up questions. She simply nodded and carried her overnight bag upstairs. That, Callum knew, was worse than crying. The temporary nanny Faye was excellent, patient, well-trained, professional in every measurable way. Ava and Isla were cooperative, polite, and entirely unreachable. They sat at the kitchen table during homework time and worked in parallel silence, said please and thank you, were, by every observable metric, fine. And Callum, who had spent 3 years learning to read the invisible language of his daughter's inner lives, could see clearly that they were not fine. They had simply decided, with the quiet, self-protective intelligence of children who have already lost one person, not to invest fully in someone who might also disappear. It gutted him. He started picking up the forged journal at night, reading it again, not for confirmation this time, but looking for doubt, looking for the crack in it, and something bothered him. He read the entries over and over. The entries were too consistent. No contradictions, no changes of feeling, no moments where the writer doubted herself or wrote something messy and true. Real journals were inconsistent. They captured the weather of a person's interior and weather changes. These entries read like a document, carefully, meticulously constructed, everyone pulling in the same direction. He sat with that observation for 2 days. And then began, almost unconsciously, to watch Petra differently. A comment she had made 13 months ago, which he had laughed off during the nanny search. Those girls need someone who understands your world properly, Callum, not just any kind face. The way she spoke about his home, not as a workplace but with territorial familiarity. The way her attention sharpened whenever conversations touched on his private life. Individual items, none of them proof of anything. But together, held up to new light, they formed a shape he didn't like. Ava had been carrying it for 3 weeks. Not because she was unsure of what she had seen. She was 8, not blind. She had stood in the hallway with her sister and watched through a gap in a partially open door as a woman sat at Serene's writing desk and wrote in a book with a cover that looked exactly like Serene's journal. She had been carrying it because she was afraid that if she said it wrong, or if it wasn't believed, something would be worse. She had watched what happened to adults who said things that weren't believed. She had watched it happen to Serene. But 3 weeks of watching the house feel wrong, of sitting at the dinner table with the temporary nanny, and feeling the absence of the specific warmth that had made this place livable after her mother died, had moved something in Ava from hesitation to certainty. She found Isla in their shared room on a Friday night. "We have to tell Daddy," Ava said. Isla looked at her. "What if he doesn't believe us?" Ava thought about it genuinely. Then at least we told the truth, she said. Serene always says that's the part that's up to us. Isla considered this, then nodded. He was in his home office Saturday morning when he heard two pairs of footsteps on the stairs. Ava appeared in the doorway first, pale yellow star-printed pajamas, hair needing redoing, standing with the posture of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it. Isla was directly behind her, one hand lightly holding the back of Ava's collar, not pulling, just present. Callum put down his pen. "Daddy," Ava said, "we need to tell you something. We need you to listen all the way through before you say anything." There was a quality in her voice, precise, careful, older than 8, that made him straighten in his chair. "I'm listening," he said, "all the way through." Ava told him everything. She was specific in a way that made his chest tighten. The early school release, the arrival home, Petra's car in the driveway, going upstairs quietly, the hallway, the partially open door, the woman at the desk. She described the journal. She said she recognized the cover because she had seen it on Serene's nightstand once when Serene was tucking her in, and had asked about it, and Serene had said it was where she kept her private thoughts and prayers. "Serene was downstairs," Ava said. "I saw her through the kitchen door when we came in. She was on the phone. And then we went upstairs and her room door was open and Miss Petra was at the desk, writing in the same book." "You weren't wrong," Isla said quietly from behind her sister, not offering an opinion, stating a fact. "Are you certain it was Petra?" Callum asked carefully, not doubtfully but thoroughly. Ava looked at him. "Daddy," she said, "I know what Miss Petra looks like. I've known her my whole life." The simple, unassailable logic of a child. He excused them gently, thanked them with a depth he didn't yet have words for, and sent them to get breakfast. Then he sat in his office for 7 minutes and did not move. He had been a fool, not a careless fool, a careful fool, which is harder to forgive. He had examined the evidence and had stopped examining the people who were providing it. He picked up the phone. He called a forensic documents examiner through a legal contact. The man arrived within 2 hours. While waiting, Callum went to Serene's room and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the room of a woman he had dismissed from her own life based on fabricated evidence, then went to the nightstand. He pressed his finger to the real journal's cover, then to the forged one. She had been right. He could feel it now. The forged journal's cover had a slightly smoother texture, not obvious to a casual glance, but unmistakable to a finger pressed deliberately. She had told him. Standing there that night being accused, her whole livelihood and her relationship with 2 children she loved on the line, she had told him calmly and clearly. And he had not looked. The examination took 45 minutes. The forged document was produced by someone who studied the original handwriting carefully and practiced extensively, the examiner said. The replication is impressive at casual viewing. However, under magnification, the pressure patterns are inconsistent. A person's natural writing has a subconscious pressure signature that is almost impossible to replicate over extended writing because it isn't a conscious behavior. Additionally, the ink composition differs. The genuine samples were produced with a ballpoint instrument, while the forged entries used a fine liner pen attempting to simulate ballpoint strokes. He closed both journals. "This is a forgery." Callum called Petra and asked her to come to the penthouse that afternoon, some follow-up questions about the household situation. Professional tone, nothing that would signal what was waiting. She arrived at 3 o'clock. She walked into the dining room and found both journals open on the table, the examiner's report beside them. The handwriting samples from Serene's confirmed documents arranged to the right. Her composure was exceptional. She looked at the table for a long moment with the face of someone making very rapid internal calculations. Then she looked up. and whatever she found in Callum's expression told her that the calculation had already been completed, by him, before she arrived. "I have been loyal to you for 6 years," she said. Her voice was steady, almost proud. "You have been exceptional at your job for 6 years," Callum said. "Those are not the same thing. Loyalty doesn't do this to someone." She didn't confess, but she didn't deny it either. And in Callum's experience, the absence of denial from someone as precise and verbally skilled as Petra was its own form of confession. "Your resignation letter will be on my desk by Monday morning," he said. "I won't pursue legal action if you leave quietly and completely, but you will have no reference from me, and you will not contact me, this household, or my daughters ever again." Not cruel, not theatrical. Precise. Petra stood, looked at him once, something moving through her expression too complex to name, somewhere between shame and grief, and the devastation of someone whose long game has conclusively run out. She left without another word. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. He called Serene at 6 o'clock that evening. "Serene," he said, "I owe you an apology that I don't have adequate language for." Silence. "Then, did you find out what happened?" "My daughters told me what they saw 3 weeks ago, the afternoon of the early school release, and a documents examiner confirmed what they already proved: the journal was a forgery. You were telling me the truth the night I confronted you, and I chose not to look." He heard her exhale, not a cry, just the sound of something releasing. "Your daughters," she said softly. "They came to me together. Ava did most of the talking. Isla made sure I understood." A pause. "They're extraordinary, Callum." Her voice was full, not of grievance, of love. "They are," he agreed. "And they need you back. But I want to be clear, I'm not asking on the basis of our need. I'm asking because what was taken from you was taken unjustly, and you deserve the chance to come back on your own terms if you want it." A long quiet. "All right," Serene said. "Just that." She came back on a Wednesday. She came through the front door with her bag over her shoulder, and had barely cleared the entrance when she heard it. The double thunder of 2 pairs of feet running at full speed down a staircase that was not supposed to be run on. Ava hit her first, both arms around Serene's waist, face pressed into her side, not speaking, just holding, the way children hold on when the scary part is finally over. Isla came behind her, quieter always, and pressed the side of her face against Serene's arm and stayed there. Serene lowered herself slightly and put both hands on their heads. She looked up at the high ceiling of the penthouse, at this house that had been made into a trap for her by someone who could not comprehend that a woman might simply love doing what she was called to do, and she breathed. "I missed you," Ava said, lifting her face. "I missed both of you," Serene said, "every single day." Isla stepped back and looked at her with those old, quiet eyes. "We told him," she said. "We saw what she was doing and we told him." "I know," Serene said. "You were very brave." "We just told the truth," Isla said, plainly, with the calm certainty of a child who has not yet learned to find this complicated. Serene smiled, the full kind, the kind that reached everything. "That," she said, "is the bravest thing there is." Callum was standing in the kitchen doorway. He had watched it all, had needed to watch it to stand there and see with his own eyes the thing he had nearly permanently destroyed through a failure of faith. He intended to sit with that discomfort, not to resolve it quickly, not to perform a recovery. He had been careful and precise and still gotten it wrong. That was not a comfortable thing to sit with. He intended to sit with it. "Good morning, Callum," Serene said, looking at him over the girls' heads. "Good morning, Serene." A pause. "Welcome home." He meant it exactly the way it sounded. In the weeks that followed, the house rebuilt itself. Dinners slowed down again. Ava's appetite came back. Isla's drawings reappeared on the refrigerator. A new one appeared on a Thursday, 4 figures at a kitchen table. She had drawn Serene with her natural hair loose, the way she wore it in the evenings when the day was done. Underneath, in Isla's careful hand, our Wednesday. One evening, sitting on the edge of Ava's bed after lights out, Callum told her the thing he had been carrying. "You were braver than I was," he said. "What you and Isla did, I want you to know that I know that." Ava pulled her blanket to her chin, embarrassed and pleased in equal measure. "Serene says the truth doesn't need a lot of noise," she said. "It just needs someone willing to say it." Callum looked at his daughter for a long time. "She's right," he said quietly. He turned off the light and stood in the hallway for a moment, just a man who had been given a second chance to see clearly, and who intended not to waste it. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't what was said. It's what was never believed. A woman who gave everything, her time, her care, her genuine heart, was nearly destroyed not by an enemy who confronted her, but by one who moved silently, who used her own handwriting against her, who turned the very trust she had built into the weapon that almost broke her. What saved Serene was not a system, not a document examiner or a legal process. What saved her were 2 little girls who paid attention, who held what they knew quietly and carefully until the moment came, who understood, better than the adults around them, the most important distinction in any situation built on lies: the difference between what looks true and what is. Some wounds don't disappear just because someone says sorry. Serene came back. She chose the girls. She chose the house. She accepted his apology with grace and without theater. But something had shifted. Not broken, shifted. The way a bone heals after a fracture. It knits back together, it holds, it functions. But it doesn't feel the same when the weather changes. The memory of being doubted, of standing there, telling the truth, and watching him choose not to look, lives in the body differently than it lives in the mind. The mind forgives. The body remembers. Think about that for a moment. If you were Serene, a woman falsely accused, dismissed from the children she loved, sent away by a man who chose paper over a person, would you have gone back? Or would the memory of that moment of standing there, telling the truth, and watching him choose not to look, be too heavy to carry back through that same front door? And if you were Callum, a precise man who still got it wrong, who needed his 8-year-old daughters to show him what he should have seen himself, do you believe an apology, no matter how sincere, is ever truly enough? I'm reading every comment. If you think this was shocking, wait until you see what he did when he slapped the nanny in front of his daughter. Watch that story next. If you believe that truth matters, that quiet, faithful people who give everything deserve to be protected, then you already belong in this community. This channel was built for you. Subscribe to Nanny Grace channel right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. If this one moved you, leave it a like. It tells the world that stories about dignity, truth, and the people who fight quietly for both deserve to be seen. Because here on Nanny Grace channel, the truth always finds its way home. Always.